A worldwide pandemic, a new virus that's unpredictable and highly contagious. Health and medical officials scramble to find appropriate solutions. Consumers begin to panic. The supply chain responds to rapidly changing disease dynamics, major shifts in priorities, and erratic consumer behavior. Federal, state, and local governments impose lockdowns. Seemingly overnight, a new normal emerges. What are the consequences for the logistics and goods movement industry from all these dramatic and rapid pivots in demand, supply, government action, and health and safety concerns? In March of 2020, the supply chain began to feel the impact of the COVID-19 worldwide pandemic. The new, previously unknown coronavirus rapidly spread from its origin in China to the rest of Asia, Europe, the United States, Canada, and eventually the entire world. Caught off guard by the rapid spread of the virus and the alarming death toll among the highest-risk patients, governors and mayors of densely populated areas enacted and enforced shutdowns of schools, businesses, and major industries. Many consumers reacted to this dramatic shift in daily life with panic buying and hoarding of essential goods. Bath tissue, paper towels, cleansing wipes, bottled water, plastic gloves, and various over-the-counter medicines disappeared from store shelves. Soon, online retailers also ran out of product lines and had difficulty replacing the items within reasonable time frames. Personal protective equipment, known as PPE, became scarce just as the demand from first responders and hospital workers increased exponentially. Vital food and protein items were the next to vanish from grocery markets. Meat, eggs, poultry, canned soup, rice, and beans were hard to find. Meanwhile, ironically and unfortunately, American farmers faced difficulty accessing distribution for many of their products in the early stages of the crisis and were forced to dump ripe, perfectly good produce and other agricultural commodities. One of the major reasons for this regrettable waste was the fact that 40% of America's pre-pandemic food consumption involved restaurants, fast casual dining, and other prepared meal vendors which had been closed through lockdown edicts.
Agriculture faces rather significant challenges in distribution, both domestic and international. You may want those really cool Adidas shoes, but if you don't get them for a couple more weeks, well, you'll be impatient, but the shoes will survive. You start putting delays in agriculture, the product is diminished or destroyed, refrigerated or not refrigerated. There's a time sensitivity.
Food which did make it to store shelves was cleared out within 2 days, a process which normally occurs in 2 to 3 weeks of regular consumption. Away from the grocery stores, suddenly the normal purchasing patterns of non-food products and big-ticket items ground to a standstill. Rising unemployment and cautious decisions to save financial resources in a tenuous economic and precarious social climate caused this second radical shift in consumer behavior following the first wave of panic hoarding. The closing of retail shops because of state government-issued orders to shelter in place also resulted in the shuttering of factories and warehouses. This phenomenon existed worldwide, exacerbating an emergency that, if only regional, could have been resolved more seamlessly with less disruption, less disorder, and presumably less finger-pointing. Perhaps the worst impact of the supply chain crisis involved allegations and instances of price gouging, opportunism, withholding of essential products, and hoarding for purposes of future sales at higher prices. Some hastily sold products, such as new hand sanitizers, actually included harmful or toxic chemicals. Other items were falsely marketed as effective cures or treatments for coronavirus. Given this litany of concerns during the COVID-19 pandemic, how well did the supply chain, or more accurately, the various and diverse supply chains, perform? How did they adjust and adapt to the abruptly changing conditions? Could any of these crisis points have been anticipated? Should there have been better preparation for such a random worldwide event? and what lessons have been learned which will inform future crisis management planning.
If people want to talk about a supply chain failure, was this that you intended to get something from overseas and you were unable to do so? Was this that you intended to get something domestically and you were unable to do so? Or was this that you wanted to get substantially more of something, either from overseas or domestically, and you were unable to do so? Those are three separate questions. We saw those things all mixed together as the pandemic hit the supply chain. And I think often in people's minds, those mix together.
Any discussion of the supply chain needs to start with an understanding of how the chain begins. The supply chain always begins with consumer demand. If a product is strongly desired or needed, the supply chain will produce it and deliver it from the factory floor to the retail floor as quickly as possible. In recent years, the supply chain has diversified significantly in response to both international and regional events involving economic and political developments, as well as natural disasters and climate-related issues. Sellers of goods, also known as beneficial cargo owners, seek reliability along with financial feasibility. These retailers keep their eyes open for options with alternative production and distribution systems. The often used cliché, perfect storm, has applied in large measure during the 2020 COVID-19 outbreak. Well-publicized trade disputes and trade conflicts between the U.S. and China preceded the pandemic. Framed against this tumultuous backdrop, the virus emanated in China, forcing the shutdown of factories in what is still the largest producing nation of manufactured goods and medical supplies. Much of the PPE the world purchases is made in China, or was at the beginning of the crisis. Making matters worse, accusations were leveled several times of PPE hoarding and price gouging by Chinese manufacturers. Abnormal consumer reaction in the U.S. fueled the next phase of the crisis, where fear-induced demand pushed suppliers past the breaking point in a few specific product categories. Deliveries from overseas were slow in coming, and domestic producers struggled to ramp up production capacity by 200% or more. Meanwhile, the massive infrastructure was still in place to receive imports and distribute goods. The capacity at the local ports remained viable and flexible, with the ability to get products from the marine terminals to the store shelves in a reasonable time period, although there were closures of some warehouses. Initially, various intermittent delays happened with cargo distribution. These delays often occurred because local and state government officials struggled with the definitions and categorizations for essential versus non-essential employees. Also, there were similar difficulties in determining distinctions for types of products and which trucks would be assigned pickup and delivery prioritization. As the number of ships sailing from the Far East diminished, U.S. ports experienced reductions in ship berths and longshore labor calls. For the first half of 2020, there were 104 canceled sailings from Asia to the San Pedro Bay compared to 41 cancellations during the same period in 2019. Recessionary pressures have dampened consumer spending, reducing cargo handling by double digits, possibly leading to a 15% decline by year-end. Labor shift work has been down by as much as 18% at the docks.
If you look back at March and look at our volumes, we were down about 30% in cargo volumes. If you look at July and August, these ports processed more than 1.6 million TEUs. So we went from a very low number to a dramatically high number. So that shows this huge flexibility that we have at the gateway of Southern California. In order for us to be processing 1.6 million TEUs in July and August, there is no other gateway that has the capability to do that.
On the other hand, online purchase and delivery of groceries has now increased by 570% since the crisis began. Farmers who previously supplied restaurants directly have found ways to redirect food products to online distributors. This redirection took place in a matter of 2 to 3 months. More redirection likely will become common in many industries as the crisis evolves and if more waves of the virus require rethinking the way consumers access supplies. Incidentally, Last mile delivery was also a major concern for many online retailers and needs additional coordination in times of crisis. It seems clear that the cold chaining process utilized in delivering perishable food products will be adopted in a similar fashion when facilitating the mass movement of anticipated vaccines and other medicines aimed at stemming the spread of COVID-19.
We had a turbo boost to e-commerce during this time when everybody was staying home. And I think, as I said, I don't think we're going back to retail brick and mortar. And I think people will look back and remember this COVID period is when we really became addicted to home delivery e-commerce.
In some cases, the media may have overplayed the leanness of inventory supplies. Most inventory controllers have learned valuable lessons from previous natural disasters, as well as from manufacturing source diversification efforts, including nearshoring and onshoring. And of course, there were additional lessons learned from 2 or more years of trade conflicts. Going forward, no one will proceed without a backup plan and alternative supply sources. Sometimes, procurement may take precedence over product flow movement, which will create its own set of efficiency concerns. For various applications, the just-in-time delivery construct may need to be reassessed in favor of the concentration of vital supplies. The question remains whether the recent past is prologue for the future. Or was this pandemic supply chain crisis simply a singularity for economists, in the same way the Big Bang Theory is for astronomers? Either way, it would be wise and prudent for the economists and the supply chain managers to entertain their second thoughts and third thoughts as they gaze into the golden sunset and the gleaming night sky at the end of the day.